I truly believed my son's wedding would be the most peaceful day of my life. I wore the sky blue dress my late husband always loved, thinking it would honor our family. But as I walked past the rows of guests, I heard a sharp, mocking voice slice through the music. My future daughter-in-law, Seraphina, smirked openly while her mother, Madeline, said loudly, "That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a dress." The crowd chuckled, some softly, others boldly, until the humiliation wrapped around my throat like a tightening rope. But the one person who didn't laugh was my son, Rowan. He stood up from the altar, his expression dark and unwavering, and what he said next shattered the room. No one knew what Rowan had discovered, and the truth he released didn't just end a wedding, it destroyed an entire family by the next morning.
My name is Clarissa Hale. I'm 59 years old. And as I stepped into the crystal-lit ballroom, I believed I was entering a day meant for joy, not humiliation. I held my small silver clutch tightly, wearing the soft blue dress my late husband always adored, hoping it would bring comfort on such an emotional occasion. The guests glanced my way, some with polite smiles, others with thinly disguised judgment. But I kept walking, reminding myself this day was about my son, Rowan. The chandeliers sparkled, musicians tuned their instruments, and everything looked perfect. But deep inside, a strange heaviness pressed against my chest, as if the room itself was warning me that something unforgivable was about to unfold in front of everyone. When I approached Seraphina, expecting warmth or at least basic courtesy, she turned slowly, her smile sharp enough to slice through the air. "Oh, you made it," she said, as if my presence were a surprise inconvenience. Her gaze scanned my dress, my hair, my hands, judging, measuring, dismissing. I tried to return her smile gently, hoping we might start this union with grace, but she stepped back as though I'd invaded her space. Guests nearby exchanged looks, sensing tension. Seraphina leaned toward her bridesmaid and whispered something that made the entire group snicker. I felt my cheeks warm, but I kept my posture straight. I told myself it was just nerves, but the chill in her voice said otherwise. As I moved toward the front rows, Seraphina's mother, Madeline, intercepted me with a perfectly polished fake smile, the kind worn by people who believe they own the room. She leaned close, pretending to adjust her bracelet while whispering, "You really could have tried harder with your appearance." Her breath was warm, her words venomous. I froze, unsure whether to defend myself or ignore her cruelty. Before I could respond, she glanced around to make sure others were listening, then added, "Some mothers know how to present themselves. Others, well, they simply can't." Soft chuckles spread through the nearby seats. The humiliation simmered beneath my skin, but I forced a small nod, refusing to let her see how deeply she'd cut me. It happened suddenly, loud, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Madeline raised her voice just enough for the surrounding tables to hear as she stared directly at me. "That's not a mother," she said, dripping with scorn. "That's a mistake in a dress." The words crashed through the hall like a dropped tray, echoing in the stunned silence that followed. Seraphina burst into laughter, leaning on her bridesmaid as if she'd heard the funniest thing all night. Conversations around us halted. Someone gasped. Someone else stifled a laugh. I stood frozen, every muscle tight, my breathing shallow. The humiliation didn't just sting, it burned. But worse than their cruelty was the fact that 200 people simply watched. Within seconds, dozens of eyes shifted toward me, curious, judgmental, entertained. The string quartet faltered for a moment before resuming awkwardly, unable to cover the tension thickening the air. A couple in the front row whispered behind their programs. Another woman shook her head sympathetically but didn't dare intervene. I felt trapped in the center of a spotlight I never asked for. My throat tightened as I forced myself not to cry, not here, not while surrounded by people waiting for my reaction. I smoothed my dress with trembling hands, praying for the ceremony to begin, praying for the moment to pass. But instead,
Everything felt like it was slowing down, stretching into an endless, humiliating silence. I sat down carefully, hoping the chair might hide my shaking legs. My hands clutched the edges of my clutch so tightly my knuckles went white. I repeated silent reminders in my mind. Stay calm. Don't cry. This is Rowan's day. But the voices around me murmured like a harsh wind, replaying Madeline's insult in endless variations. The floral scent in the room suddenly felt suffocating, pressing against my lungs. I tried focusing on the altar, imagining Rowan's childhood smile, the way he used to hug me before school, anything to drown out the humiliation. But then Seraphina passed by with her bridesmaids, smirking proudly, as if emotionally crushing me was part of her wedding entertainment. Then, in the middle of the whispers and forced laughter, Rowan slowly stood up from the altar. His face wasn't confused, it was furious. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp as he scanned the room, taking in the mocking faces, the cruel smirks, the way I struggled to keep myself together. For a moment, the entire hall fell silent, sensing something was shifting. Seraphina noticed too. Her smile faded as she watched him take a breath like a man about to detonate truth. Enough, Rowan said, loud enough to command attention. The guests straightened. The musicians stopped. Even Madeline froze. In that moment, I knew the humiliation wasn't over, but something far bigger was about to begin. Rowan turned from the altar and walked straight towards Seraphina, each step echoing like a warning across the silent ballroom. She tried to smile, lifting her bouquet like nothing was wrong, but her hands trembled. "Rowan, honey, let's just start the ceremony," she whispered, glancing at guests nervously. Rowan shook his head slowly. "You think humiliating my mother is funny?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to silence every whisper. Seraphina's eyes darted toward her mother, expecting support, but Madeline looked frozen, unsure of what Rowan knew. "I didn't mean," Seraphina began, but Rowan raised his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "No more lies." And the way he said it made everyone sit up straighter. Rowan took a deep breath, then reached for the ring in his pocket. The guests leaned forward, expecting a dramatic proposal moment, but instead he held it between two fingers and let it drop to the floor. The metallic clink echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Seraphina gasped, covering her mouth as her bouquet fell from her hands. "Rowan, what are you doing?" she whispered, panic rising in her voice. He didn't hesitate. "I won't marry someone who disrespects my mother," he said firmly. A murmur rippled across the room. Shock? Disbelief? Curiosity? But no one dared speak. Even the wedding planner stood frozen. Seraphina's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized the dominance she flaunted moments ago was slipping away. For the first time that night, the ballroom was completely silent. The musicians didn't move, guests didn't breathe, and even the air felt still. Seraphina looked around desperately, searching for sympathy, but no one met her eyes. Her own bridesmaids stepped back, not wanting to be associated with her now. Rowan looked at the guests and said, "My mother deserved respect. She raised me alone, while your family lived off illusions." A few gasps rose from the crowd. Madeline tried to stand, trying to gain control, but Rowan's glare kept her seated. I sat frozen in my chair, trembling, unable to process what was happening. The humiliation I felt minutes ago shifted into confusion, fear, and a strange sense that something much bigger was unfolding. Rowan reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folded stack of documents. The rustling paper was the loudest sound in the room. "Seraphina," he said, "you pretended to love me, but you loved my bank account more." Seraphina's eyes widened as she recognized the papers, printouts of private messages, deleted chats, and financial requests she thought he'd never seen. The guests leaned forward collectively, like an audience waiting for the next twist. Rowan continued, "I asked for transparency. Instead, I found transfers, secret spending, and messages planning something far worse after the wedding." Seraphina shook her head violently. "Those are taken out of context," she cried. But Rowan didn't budge. "Then explain them," he said calmly. She couldn't. Seraphina stumbled backward, hitting the decorated arch behind her. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic spreading across her face. "Rowan, I swear, your mother misunderstood everything," she pleaded, throwing me a desperate glance as if I could save her. But Rowan stepped between us protectively. "Don't drag her into your lies." Guests exchanged uneasy looks. Some whispered that they always suspected something about Seraphina's behavior. Madeline shot up from her chair, shouting, "You won't ruin my daughter's future." But Seraphina waved her hands frantically. "Mom, stop!" she snapped, her voice cracking. In that moment, cracks formed not just in Seraphina's facade, but in her relationship with her own mother. Madeline stormed forward, pointing a trembling finger at Rowan. "You ungrateful boy! Everything we did was for you!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. Rowan stared at her coldly. "You did everything for your greed." Madeline's face twisted in outrage as she turned the blame toward me. "This is your fault. You poisoned him against us," she hissed. Her accusation drew several shocked reactions from the crowd. I stood up slowly, hands shaking. But before I could speak, Rowan positioned himself in front of me like a shield. "My mother doesn't need to defend herself," he said. "You do." Madeline's mouth opened and closed, like she had words, but no lie strong enough to cover the truth.
Rowan stepped onto the stage, facing the stunned audience. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice steady, "but this wedding is over." Gasps burst from every corner of the ballroom. Seraphina collapsed into a chair, trembling, her bouquet scattered across the floor. Madeline tried to argue, but security approached hesitantly, unsure whether Rowan had requested them or simply anticipated chaos. Rowan walked toward me and extended his hand. "Let's go home, Mom." For a moment, the humiliation, the shame, the pain, all of it melted under the warmth of those words. As we walked out together, I could feel every pair of eyes watching us. But for the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I felt defended.
Rowan guided Clarissa to the car gently, making sure she was steady after the emotional shock of the evening. Clarissa didn't say much. She just kept wiping silent tears, replaying the insult she endured. Rowan felt guilt twist inside him, not because he caused it, but because he let it happen for so long. When they reached her home, he walked her to the door, promising she would never again be humiliated in his name. Clarissa hugged him tightly, and for a moment, he realized just how much strength she had shown despite everything. As he drove away, he felt a pull inside him, knowing the night wasn't finished, not by a long shot.
Back at his apartment, Rowan opened his laptop and pulled up the folder containing the suspicious financial reports he had found weeks earlier. Several files were missing, gone without explanation. He wasn't careless. Someone had deliberately accessed his account. His stomach tightened as he noticed the last login timestamp didn't match his usual schedule. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was evidence. Someone had been spying, tracking, and attempting to erase proof of Madeline's manipulation. Rowan leaned back, realizing the wedding disaster wasn't an accident. It was the result of a much deeper corruption. And if documents had vanished once, they could vanish again. He needed help before everything disappeared completely.
A knock at the door startled him. When Rowan opened it, Aiden, his best man, stood there, still wearing his half-untucked dress shirt, eyes full of tension. He said he needed to talk, now. Rowan let him in, and Aiden immediately confessed that he had overheard Seraphina and Madeline discussing plans before the wedding. They were terrified Rowan had uncovered too much. Aiden admitted he didn't speak earlier because he feared being dragged into their mess, but tonight changed everything. He handed Rowan a small USB drive he secretly copied from Seraphina's cloud folder. "You'll want to see this," he whispered. Rowan realized this was bigger than personal betrayal. It was criminal. Rowan plugged in the USB drive, and the screen filled with spreadsheets, rows of unauthorized bank transfers tied to companies he didn't recognize. Each one traced back to Madeline's shell accounts. The amounts were staggering, and the pattern was unmistakable.
Seraphina's family had been funneling money illegally for years, and their marriage to Rowan was meant to shield everything behind his reputable business. Rowan scrolled, his hands shaking. If this leaked, it wouldn't just ruin their image. It would trigger investigations, lawsuits, maybe even arrests. He felt a strange clarity settle over him. They hadn't just mocked his mother. They had tried to use him as a financial shield, and they thought he wouldn't fight back.
Aiden pointed to a folder labeled Citrine Holdings. Inside were contracts showing Madeline acting as an unauthorized broker, moving funds between international accounts in exchange for under-the-table commissions. The deals were illegal, risky, and connected to people Rowan had only heard about in boardroom warnings. Suddenly, everything made sense. Madeline wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous. If Rowan had married Seraphina, she would have gained access to his company's clean reputation and financial network, giving Madeline the perfect cover. The realization made Rowan feel sick. He looked at Aiden, who nodded grimly. They both understood this wasn't something they could ignore. Exposure was inevitable. The question now was how to do it safely.
While Rowan examined the files, Seraphina was across town spiraling into panic. She paced her mother's living room, calling Rowan repeatedly, leaving dozens of voicemails begging him not to ruin them. Madeline, furious, blamed everyone but herself and warned Seraphina to stay quiet and let me handle it. But Seraphina knew her mother couldn't fix this. Her marriage was gone, her reputation collapsing. And now Rowan had evidence that could destroy their entire family. She opened social media, seeing the wedding disaster already trending. Her hand shook as she whispered, "What have we done?" For the first time, she understood the consequences of siding with her mother, and she feared what Rowan would do next. Realizing the danger of keeping this information alone, Rowan called a trusted private investigator named Leland Pierce, someone he had worked with years ago during a corporate dispute. Leland arrived within an hour, sharp-eyed and silent, studying the documents with growing concern. He confirmed the transfers were enough to trigger a federal case and warned Rowan that Madeline might attempt to destroy evidence or flee. Rowan agreed to hand everything over, but only after ensuring Clarissa's safety. Leland suggested one more step: expose Madeline publicly before she had time to twist the narrative. Rowan nodded slowly. The wedding had been their battlefield, but tomorrow would be the war. Early the next morning, investigators from the Financial Crimes Bureau marched into Madeline's corporate headquarters with warrants in hand. Employees froze as uniformed officers moved through glass hallways, securing computers, locking filing cabinets, and escorting department heads into separate rooms for questioning. Madeline arrived minutes later, shocked to see her own office sealed. She stormed toward the lead agent, demanding answers, but he simply handed her the warrant with her name on top in bold letters. Her face drained of color as she realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had handed over detailed evidence. "Who did this?" she whispered, but deep down she knew. Rowan wasn't staying silent. The walls she'd built over years were finally closing in on her. Inside the conference rooms, investigators interviewed employees who had long suspected irregularities but were too afraid to speak. Now that Madeline's empire was shaking, they began confessing everything. Strange late-night orders, sudden financial shifts, documents they were told to delete, and unexplained transfers that never matched project budgets. One accountant admitted she kept photocopies of suspicious spreadsheets just in case. Another revealed that Madeline threatened to fire anyone who asked too many questions. As confessions piled up, investigators constructed a timeline of illegal activity, each testimony adding another nail in Madeline's coffin. By noon, they had gathered more evidence than Rowan ever imagined. The silence that once protected Madeline had shattered. Everyone was ready to let the truth spill. Seraphina was summoned to headquarters, trembling as she entered a stark room with two investigators waiting. They asked about her mother's accounts, her involvement, her knowledge of transfers, her access to Rowan's business records, and why certain files disappeared weeks before the wedding. Seraphina insisted she never touched anything, but investigators showed screenshots of her login from Rowan's cloud system. Tears filled her eyes as she realized how deeply she'd been manipulated and used by her own mother. The pressure cracked her composure, and she admitted overhearing conversations about hiding funds before the wedding. The investigators exchanged quick glances, knowing they'd just received a confession that connected her directly to Madeline's schemes. Seraphina left the building feeling herself unravel. At the Bureau's downtown office, Rowan met with investigators, handing them organized folders, digital copies, timestamps, and the USB drive Aiden had provided. The agents listened carefully as Rowan explained every discovery: missing files, unauthorized logins, shell companies, and Madeline's secret international transactions. His calm voice. Rowan didn't feel heroic, he felt exhausted. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. He only had one request: protect his mother, Clarissa, at all costs. The agents assured him she would be kept out of the public storm. Rowan walked out, feeling the shift begin. Later that day, Clarissa returned home from a quiet walk and found Seraphina waiting on her porch, eyes swollen, makeup streaked, hands shaking. "Please," she whispered, "tell Rowan to stop. He'll ruin us." Clarissa looked at her, remembering the cruel laughter at the wedding, the humiliation, the disrespect. But she also saw a young woman drowning in consequences she'd never imagined. Clarissa spoke gently but firmly. She explained that Rowan wasn't acting out of spite, he was acting out of necessity. "Your mother built this collapse," Clarissa said softly. "Rowan is just refusing to be buried under it." Seraphina broke down, sinking to her knees, realizing she couldn't undo what had been set in motion. Clarissa walked inside, closing the door with finality. By evening, Madeline's world was disintegrating. Her investors pulled out within hours of hearing whispers of the investigation. Board members resigned one by one, desperate to distance themselves from her collapsing empire. Her accounts were frozen, her communications monitored, and her business partners refused to return her calls. Reporters camped outside her gated home, shouting questions she pretended not to hear. One news alert showed her staff carrying boxes of confiscated documents to evidence vans. Another headline announced a federal audit of every company she had touched in the last decade. Madeline screamed at the television, insisting she would fix everything. But her voice cracked under the weight of fear. For the first time, she understood she was no longer untouchable.
That night, every major news network aired the story. Financial scandal exposes billionaire Madeline Vero. Photos from the wedding circulated alongside leaked interview excerpts and videos of investigators entering her office. Social media exploded with outrage, disbelief, and dark humor. Influencers dissected her downfall, while financial analysts predicted the total collapse of her empire. Rowan watched quietly from his living room, overwhelmed by how quickly everything unfolded. Clarissa sat beside him, gripping his hand, not out of fear, but out of relief. Across town, Seraphina sobbed alone, realizing her mother was finished and her own reputation ruined. And Madeline, she stared blankly at the screen as her empire died in real time.
You might think everything has already fallen apart, but what comes next is far worse. Stay with me and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything changes.
By sunrise, news broke that every one of Madeline's accounts, domestic and international, had been frozen pending full investigation. Her credit cards stopped working, her offshore access was revoked, and her business apps logged her out automatically. She called every banker she knew demanding answers, but none could help her without risking legal backlash. The empire she built on manipulation was suddenly nothing more than locked screens and denied requests. Standing inside her once glittering office, she felt like a stranger surrounded by trophies of a life collapsing under its own lies. For the first time in decades, Madeline felt powerless. And when she tried calling Seraphina, her daughter didn't pick up. The silence was louder than any courtroom gavel.
Seraphina woke up to reporters outside her apartment and dozens of messages from friends distancing themselves from her. Desperate, she packed a suitcase, planning to flee to her cousin's place out of state. But the moment she stepped outside, investigators approached her with a court summons. She froze, realizing escape was impossible. Forced back inside, she sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered clothes and unanswered calls from her mother. She tried to convince herself she deserved sympathy, but deep down, she knew she had crossed too many lines. Rowan had warned her. Clarissa had silently endured her cruelty. Now she was alone, facing consequences she once believed her family wealth would shield her from. That illusion was gone forever.
By afternoon, the community that once admired the Bennett family erupted with judgment. Former friends posted statements condemning Madeline's corruption, and business partners deleted pictures and public acknowledgments. Local news talked about Clarissa's humiliation at the wedding, revealing how Madeline and Seraphina mocked her publicly. Sympathy shifted towards Rowan and Clarissa as neighbors left flowers and notes of support outside their home. Meanwhile, the Bennett residence was vandalized with angry messages demanding justice. Seraphina watched the backlash online, her heart pounding as she realized her mother's power had evaporated. The reputation wasn't just damaged, it was annihilated. And for once, the world wasn't looking away. Every lie they had told was now public record.
Rowan met with his company's legal team and board, providing full transparency about the investigation and his connection to the Bennett scandal. After reviewing evidence and hearing his explanation, the board voted unanimously to clear him of all suspicion. They held a press conference naming Rowan as a whistleblower and commending his integrity. Analysts praised his courage for stepping forward, despite personal ties. Overnight, he went from a man nearly trapped in a toxic marriage to a respected figure who prevented corporate catastrophe. Rowan didn't bask in the praise, he only felt relief. For years, the Bennetts tried to control him, but now the truth stood firmly on his side. His life was finally his own again.
Clarissa spent the morning tending to her small garden, something she hadn't done peacefully in months. Neighbors stopped by to tell her she didn't deserve the humiliation she endured, offering meals, warm hugs, and sincere apologies for not speaking up sooner. Clarissa accepted their kindness quietly, grateful the storm was beginning to calm. She sat on her porch, sipping tea, watching birds land on the fence Rowan built years ago. For the first time since the wedding disaster, she felt the weight lift from her chest. Her son was safe, the truth was out, and the people who hurt her were finally facing justice. Peace didn't return all at once, but it was returning, piece by fragile piece. Seraphina appeared at Rowan's home late in the evening, her face pale and streaked with tears. She begged him to speak to investigators, insisting she never meant to hurt him or his mother. She swore she was manipulated by Madeline, that she was scared, that she chose the wrong side. Rowan listened without anger, only exhaustion. He told her honestly that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt on apologies delivered under pressure. Seraphina collapsed to her knees, pleading for just one more chance. But Rowan had learned too much: the lies, the betrayal, the cruelty. He helped her stand, but he didn't let her inside. Some doors once shut stay shut forever. The next morning, Rowan stood on the hill overlooking the city, feeling the cool wind brush against him as he reflected on everything that had happened. The Bennett empire had fallen. Seraphina was facing charges, and Madeline's influence had finally been stripped away. Rowan wasn't celebrating, he was simply free. He decided to take Clarissa on a long-promised trip out of town, leaving behind the chaos and bitterness. As he packed the car, Clarissa hugged him tightly, proud of the strength he showed through every trial. When they drove away, Rowan felt a sense of closure he'd never known before. He didn't look back, because the life waiting ahead was finally his, untouched by the destruction they left behind.